From I Am Interchange, this is the Hatch podcast series. It is from the past that we are offered a glimpse of the future. And so it is with Co-Palace in Switzerland. In 1942, with all of Europe mired in World War II, Swiss diplomat Philippe Motu wrote, "If Switzerland is spared by the war, our task will be to make available for moral rearmament, a place where Europeans torn apart by hatred, suffering, and resentment can come together. Co is the place." When the opportunity to purchase the Co-Palace Hotel arose in 1946, Motu and Robert Handlüser, with the financial and physical help of hundreds of fellow Swiss citizens, realized his intentions. The first conferences graced the palace's grounds that summer, and the Co-Foundation, now Initiatives of Change, was founded that fall. The nonprofit foundation has utilized the space as an international center for reconciliation, dialogue, capacity building, and hope ever since. At the close of June 2023, thought leaders, activists, innovators, artists, and disruptors gathered at the palace to collaborate and commune in a Hatch impact co-creation ecosystem. During the 4-day peer-to-peer acceleration, attendees discussed project roadblocks, workshopped barriers to access and evolution, were inspired by speakers, and worked to develop achievable solutions capable of global impact. I'm Tate Chamberlain, and in this episode, I look to the next generation of thought leaders, Royce Mann, Andini Makazinski, and Addie Strom, among them, for perspective around activism and the actualization of sites both sovereign and collective. When innovation outpaces understanding and age no longer brings wisdom, who should define the path forward? Who should helm the charge, and how? I'm Tate Chamberlain. This is the Hatch podcast. We're at Co-Palace, just outside of Geneva, Switzerland. We've got Royce, Andini, and Addie. We were talking a little bit earlier at dinner about activism, and I'm wondering what activism means to you all.
For me, it means having the courage to seek change in systems that you believe are flawed, are either broken or were never built in the right way. And so that can manifest itself in a number of different ways, but the common thread that I see is activism is always pushing against some sort of resistance and is always countering some sort of power structure that is fairly entrenched to an extent.
For me, I think activism is when someone is advocating very strongly for something that they believe in, usually against the norm or what is accepted in society. Yeah.
Activism, I think there's often resistance to it, but I think sometimes the resistance isn't necessarily other people or power structures. It can sometimes just be just like lack of awareness and lack of knowledge about an issue. And I think sometimes what there's activism about isn't necessarily against the norm, it's just unspoken. For example, a lot of things right now in the US, like unions are at their most support ever. The majority of US workers are in support of unions, but there's like super low union enrollment, like some of the lowest we've ever had. And so there's been a lot of activism to try to get people to join unions and to get companies to honor union structures. And so it's not necessarily, it's against the norm for the companies, but the activism isn't against like the norm for, it's what most people want. It's just that it's not being honored, which is where the problems arise.
How would you describe your type of activism?
My activism ranges from my creativity, my writing, the art I create, to direct action. I've helped organize a number of protests and marches and other demonstrations in Atlanta, where I'm based, around racial justice, criminal justice reform, gun violence prevention, and climate justice. And then connected to that is direct policy advocacy. I think that if we want to see change in the government, in the private sector, in our communities, then we need to take a multi-pronged approach And that means advocating in the halls of Congress, advocating on the streets, advocating on social media, but not only on social media, advocating at the dinner table with your family and friends who may not agree with you. So for me, I try to show up as an activist whenever I can, because, even as someone who spends most of my time on advocacy, I want to be careful even using the word activist to describe myself, because I think it's something that you have to renew every single day through your actions.
I've never personally thought of myself as an activist. I think I'm just someone who does things I'm excited about and hope other people get excited about it, but I don't want to force anything upon someone either. But I guess I've spoken at length about why we shouldn't be separating science and art in the educational system as radically, and why this kind of crucial yet often overlooked of science and art needs to occur. And then I guess through my physical actions of inventing things that were in the alternative energy space, like my flashlight that runs off the heat of your hand, or a coffee mug that harvests the excess heat of your hot drink to convert into electricity for your phone. I guess those were acts in support of usage of alternative energy, but I would never have said oh, it's because I wanted to be an activist. It was just definitely just for fun. And then people got excited by it.
Nice.
Yeah, I also don't know if I would necessarily say that, identify with the word activist, because I think activism really is something that we all should be trying to do, just as often as we can. I think it's super important to get what we have to say out there, because living in America, it's a country that it's not always great at honoring what its people ask for in a timely manner. And so I think activism, it's not a perfect way, but it is a start at least to try to get the powers that be, whether they be the government or just people with a lot of money, whatever it is, to try to get them to listen to you. My personal activism has kind of come out of necessity, honestly. I live in Montana, and Montana's a pretty conservative state. I think this country, in just the past year, over 400 anti-LGBTQ bills have been introduced. And that's just this past year. It's been happening for an increasing numbers in the past few years. And Montana has been one of the states hit the hardest, certainly. And so a lot of the activism I've been doing, the protests I've been organizing, the reasons I've been writing to political leaders is just because I have friends who are greatly, greatly suffering under what's happening.
Love that, because I think all activism is personal. You aren't going to go and really put your time and effort and put your body on the line sometimes if you don't actually care about something, whether it affects you personally, people around you, or you just have empathized on a deep level with the communities who are affected by an issue. I think that it is something very deep within us that moves us to act. And there's a quote that comes to mind. I think it was Shirley Chisholm who said it. It's something like, service is the rent we pay to live on this earth. And I think that, activism is a form of service, just being an engaged community member, whether it's through inventions that help folks around the world, as well as helping to, cultivate a broader intersection between the arts and sciences, which is so important, or fighting for LGBTQ rights, direct advocacy, direct action, whatever it is. I think that one thing that brings us all together here at Hatch is that we recognize that our time on this earth, that dash between the years on our gravestone, that needs to be used not just to feel fulfilled ourselves, but to somehow improve our community and our world.
You talked a little bit about the range of how people can be activists, from personal to whether it's fusing art and science, or to everyday necessities that will help excel people's lives. What's the range of activism?
Well, we talked about at dinner how there's activism that's much more extreme, like self-sacrifice, versus something that's like, oh, I'm posting on social media on my story, a thing that my friend posted and I think I should post it too so people know I support this cause. I mean, there's a whole range. And I think it's an interesting concept to reflect on your own life and go, okay, so how do I want to participate in activism in the certain subjects that I'm very passionate about genuinely? Because I think it's very easy now with social media to participate with a disingenuinely, if I can say that, where it's just like, oh yeah, I want to support this. And like, I feel like I should look like I'm supporting this because my friends are going to look at the story or my posts. So really thinking about what you truly care about, again, invoking this kind of empathy theme of what really pulls on your heartstrings and makes you feel for a certain group of people or a certain issue around the world, and going, how can I actually support this through, even if it's just small daily actions, or maybe you want to make a really big donation, a dog, whatever it may be. But I think there's ways for everyone to participate in the act of activism.
Piggybacking off of what she said, I think that with social media, it is very easy to sort of disingenuously circulate that stuff and do it in a way that isn't actually really helpful to anyone. And so I think a good way to know whether or not you're doing is actually activism is think about the root of the word. It's active. And so if you're participating in activism, you are actively trying to speak out about something and see the changes that you want to be made fulfilled.
So there's advocacy, being an ally, or symbolic activism. Is that what you're talking about? Are either one of those fitting my friend saw my story and shared it? Is that fit into either of those?
I think there's a place for symbolic activism. I just don't think it should be all you do. I think symbolic activism, showing people that you support them, is very important because people like to know that they're being supported. But I think if you want to be a good activist and be a better ally to your friends who are struggling, then you should try to tackle some actual direct action.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of noise and garbage on the internet already. So if you're going to repost something, at least do it with here's this resource you can check out, or there's this event happening, you can go, here. Just like reposting things with no context really is kind of just useless in my opinion. I'm more nihilistic about social media in general, though, so I will add that.
That's totally fair.
So yeah, just not only posting the video, but also on top of that, doing the due diligence to post resources that people
at the very least, if you're going to post that stuff. Yeah. But I think it's interesting because I think at certain points in the past few years on social media, people have felt obligated to post or share or support a movement versus rather than genuinely doing it. And it's been very difficult. It's almost felt like social pressure in some ways to feel like, oh, I need to post this because everyone else is, and they'll think I don't support this, So I think finding a way that feels genuine for you to support something, and just maybe you'd rather do something in person rather than post on social media, and that should be equally accepted and okay. But sometimes for some people it isn't, which is weird. Yeah,
especially if you have a following. You're like, oh, something big happened.
Yeah, then people expect you to post about it, and I'm like, well, that doesn't, just because you didn't post about it doesn't mean you're supporting it in other ways. That you're just not like posting, oh, I donated this much money, look how amazing I am. Sometimes it's good to be silent and do something in real life. I don't know.
Social media is weird that way because it can also be, conversely, the activist's greatest tool, because like when I was organizing protests, I could not have been able to do it without social media. And we relied on those people who were just posting the images on the stories because the images we had provided information on where and when it would be. And even the ones who just sort of vaguely mentioned it, hopefully it would get us some clicks. And it occasionally did. And so there definitely is a place for passive activism. But of course, none of that works if 10,000 people post a little picture of your Montana with the trans flag inlaid over it if no one shows up to the protest other than the fascists trying to shut you down. So, yeah.
Yeah, to go off of that, I think that what we often see on social media in terms of these sort of social justice trends where folks feel socially compelled, feel some sort of peer pressure to post about something. I don't think that the folks reposting it are participating in activism, but I think that oftentimes there's activism behind it. And you take, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, and it, started as a hashtag, Black Lives Matter, but there were organizers who spent weeks, I think months, deciding what was the best hashtag to use, how to launch that, how to get traction behind it. So it was very intentional. The end result was a lot of folks, many of them genuine, some of them not, posting that hashtag and giving it the chance to have a broader impact.
Do you have any examples of the best and most effective types of activism that you've seen? Then I want to explore the least effective.
I think it totally depends on the context, and you need multiple approaches. Right now in Atlanta, I've been involved in the movement to stop what many folks refer to as Cop City, a proposed police training facility that would require a forest right outside the city of Atlanta to be torn down. It's green space that had been promised by the city to be parks and public green space, but now they're trying to build a police training facility there. And we've seen such a diversity of tactics being used. And I think what has been really powerful is that folks have not been trying to police each other's tactics, especially when we're, advocating against what we see as sort of a over-policing in this country, over-criminalization, but have instead just focused on what they see as being most effective, what they see as being where they can apply their strengths and talents, and recognizing that systems of power, if you can assert pressure from multiple angles, that can be really effective. And I think there are certain instances in which forms of protest are not effective. For example, we just a few weeks ago had a city council vote on the police training facility, and leading up to that vote, I think, direct advocacy efforts focused on council members versus big civil disobedience, made more sense because we had a direct legislative avenue to stop it. And so you have to look at who's your target, what your goal is, and what are the different avenues to get there.
I would absolutely agree with that, because it really is very dependent. Because even a protest, it's like how useful it is entirely dependent, can be entirely dependent on when it is, where it is, how many people are a part of it, and also just the messaging of the protest. For example, a protest with for example, in many situations, a protest with very violent antagonistic rhetoric could cause people to just sort of ignore them or write them off as more radical than their goals actually are. Whereas in other cases, protests that are too passive could just not be effective and not be heard. And sometimes the best thing to do is direct campaigning to the people who are making decisions. But in other situations, those people aren't available and will not see reason. And so instead, what has to be done is mass demonstration, because if political leaders aren't listening to you, sometimes you have to show them that you will make yourself heard. So it really all depends on context.
For me, if I were to participate in activism, it would just be by making something, whether it's an invention or a piece of writing or a short film. For me, I'm less about going to protests and doing stuff like that versus doing something creative that could have a physical impact. But obviously, just because I make an invention doesn't mean it'll actually get to help the people I meant. It's a very long process and extremely complicated. So in some ways, it's less practical. But that's just what I personally resonate with more when I think about my past actions and how I have tried to make a difference, that's usually the path I go.
Do people hear activists, and are activists good listeners? Is listening reciprocal on both sides?
It really depends on the activist. I mean, I think a good activist group who is well run should be good at listening and should have a clear, precise message. But that often doesn't happen. And in the heat of the moment, especially if there's counter protesters, especially if they're getting violent, it can cause people to be really rude and really nasty and completely undercut the points they're trying to make. And so when you start participating in activism, you have to be smart about it. And so I think a good activist is a good listener, but certainly not all activists are good listeners. And as far as if activists are listened to, it really depends. It feels like sometimes they are. In my personal experience, a lot of what I've been doing has felt very ignored. And I think part of that's just because I'm young. Part of that's just sort of like wrong place, wrong time. And so it's definitely, it's a hard thing to do correctly because you don't always know what's going to succeed. You sometimes can have an idea, but you don't know. And I think a big part of is that uncertainty, is that fear. Even in like the safest forms of activism, there's still an element of danger. And you just really have to be aware of that.
I think there are a lot of people now on the internet that just refuse to listen to the other side. And I think there's just immense arguments that can take place, like Twitter threads that just go on and on, or on Reddit or YouTube comments. And people just aren't listening to each other. I think there's a big miscommunication, a big kind of missed kind of thing that's happening, and it's quite unfortunate. I think it's very easy on the internet to kind of get looped into one kind of very radical side of thinking on a certain subject and kind of just getting swallowed into it, and there's just no listening about to the other side, or even acknowledging that there could be another perspective that is quote unquote right. Right is not the correct word for this, but you know what I mean? Like there's no other perspective except the one that they've been reading about and being taught. And so it can become quite radical sometimes and quite aggressive, I think. And I think it's a real shame that as humans, with so many incredible tools to communicate with each other across the world, we still are not listening a lot of the times.
One thing that's ironic is that the folks who I think are at the root of the division that exists in our communities, which is largely political leaders, don't experience or participate in that same division. You have politicians basically telling us to hate folks with opposing views and then going out on the golf course with, their colleagues from the other side of the aisle. And for me, my philosophy has always been that if I can be accountable to my values, I can talk to anyone. I can form a relationship with anyone as long as they will let me speak to my values. They will let me, not too forcefully, but try and convince them, of what I believe. I will let them try and convince me of what they believe. And I think that letting your guard down, being able to really listen to what people are saying, find whether it's truth in what they're saying or finding empathy with where they're coming from, somehow being able to relate to their position allows you to be much more convincing in your arguments.
The United Nations has the Sustainable Development Goals, and they say that for the existential ones, it's probably best to achieve them by 2030. But the timing on it is actually 2093 when they're projecting that the existential ones will be solved. I'm curious how far activism should go.
That's a very open-ended question.
I see activism as a train ride. You're going in whatever direction.
But when do you stop?
There's no stopping. I mean, it just keeps going. People until nobody's on the train. Because,
But what if there's like a huge cliff and you have to either leap off the train or everyone dies?
What's the cliff in this analogy?
Like climate. Climate would be one of the existential ones that they say we're on track for 2093 instead of 2030.
I think in that case, then the activism would be the train taking people away from the cliff so they don't fall. Or at least if it's good activism that's doing its job.
This cliff, though, like if we're all going off a cliff, what type of activism in that sense would be most effective, and what would be taking it too far?
I think that we have gotten to a very distorted understanding of what violence is, and oftentimes equate damage of property with harm of human life. And that's not something that should be compared. And so for me, when I talk about violence, I'm talking about violence towards people or towards any living being, but not property destruction. And I think that, there are cases in which property destruction can be a really effective form of activism, because so many of the existing power structures are built on object wealth and are built on possessing just so much. And if you can disrupt that, points destroy it, co-opt it, whatever it may be, that can be really powerful, because that's hitting folks where it hurts.
I would completely agree with that. And obviously, I want to be clear that, I don't wish to, destroy things or cause people pain. Obviously, the first option is an activist, a good activist should always be looking for a direct and peaceful route. But sometimes what is necessary is that kind of thing. For example, in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of groups of Native Americans who took over buildings. They were armed. They went into buildings. They took them over and they camped out in them. And the goal was to get their land back. And they were criticized by a lot of other natives in their community who were just saying, this paints us in a bad image. This is too violent. We should try to get more land back and get more welfare using the systems that be, which is it's a much nicer idea and less people get hurt in it. But sometimes when things are that desperate times call for desperate measures. Now, I'm obviously not advocating for violence or harm of human life, but I think co-opting property, even though it is technically a crime, sometimes it's necessary because laws are not objective, universal laws. They're laws created by a society to keep that society running smoothly for the group of people who created it.
I guess it leads me to just the philosophical question of what it means to be wrong.
It means to be human. I mean, we're all wrong. I think at the same time, the only way you can be completely wrong is if you think you're right about everything.
I think wrongness and rightness, just like the idea of good and bad or even good and evil, they're not really real things. I think most people would agree. I think what most people would agree on is that evil is, say, something that harms the people they care about, or that them or the people they care about. Generally, people would agree on that. But not everyone does. And that's the reason most people agree on that is because we're biologically prone to that. But other than that, all of our morals are sort of put on by a society. That does not mean that they're worthless. I don't think all morals are worthless. It just means that they are also not universal, natural laws. And so I think wrongness and rightness can be right that too. I think you can be wrong about information. If I said that an electron and a proton are the same thing, then that would be wrong because that's just not true. They're different. They have different functions. But if I said it's morally wrong to believe that an electron and proton are the same thing, I don't think that's true at all. But then you could say, but does that mean if someone believes that it's morally right to kill people if they want to, then is that morally right to them? I was obviously it's not. It's not okay to kill people, But that's just my moral viewpoint. It's not objective, is all I'm saying. I think it's very important to create a society that holds values like, hey, don't kill people. But I don't think it's objective morality. And so I don't think there's an objective sense of rightness or wrongness. It's something that's created by society. I think there are little inklings of it that are just natural to us, natural to our human nature, but that's not always the case. And then I think, and this could sort of get into like a belief of God, because some people believe that there is a God who determines what is right and wrong morally. And I think that's certainly a possibility, and I'm not trying to discount that. But like, I guess I'm trying to say that even if there is a God, societal morals still different from that. And so societal rightness and wrongness are completely separate.
How couldn't God fit into morality and rightness and wrongness?
And activism.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, coming from Atlanta, the church, especially in the South, has been a haven of hate and a beacon of hope simultaneously. And so I think we, as a society, have a really complex relationship with religion and how it can either hold us back or help us move forward.
I think more so than even the idea of God, I think just the idea of religion and different religions, because basically every single religion, even religions that we tend to think of as ones that have had less of an impact on the world, every single religion has helped so many people in very profound ways and hurt many people in very profound ways. That's what they all do because they're made by humans, and that's what humans do. Now, I'm not saying that gods are necessarily made by humans. You can think that if you want. I'm not going to share an opinion because I don't know. But I think religions are certainly made by humans. And so I think at the same time, like there's been a lot of, for LGBT people, there's been a lot of protests specifically against the church and against the way that churches have dictated American life. But I think at the same time, like in other protests, like with Martin Luther King, the church was such a vital aspect of what he did. And he used the church and that community and that connection and that sense of belonging to unite people and motivate people to be activists.
I'm curious, Addie, you brought up truth and information, right? So what part of activism is fact versus emotion? Do they go hand in hand or?
I think it is complicated. I think there's an element of both. Here's an example. So let's say, this is just like a random example. There's a family of people and every time they see an ant in their house, they kill the ant because their belief is that the ants will like get into their house and make them sick, that the ants carry diseases, something like that. And the daughter of the family, for example, when she sees the ants being killed, she doesn't like it because she doesn't like the idea that these creatures are dying and it makes her sad. And so that's the emotional aspect. But at the same time, when she goes to her family about it, they'll probably say, oh, we don't like to kill them either, but we have to make sure we don't get sick. But if she can find some way to prove that the ants don't make them sick, she can use both the emotional aspect and the facts, because the parents might say, yeah, well, they're just kind of gross looking anyway, and so I think we're going to keep doing it. But then she's like, yeah, but it also makes me sad. And so now that she has both emotions and facts on her side, she's more likely to get what she wants. What I meant was emotions are often the catalyst for activism, and I don't think they should be discounted because I personally find empathy to be a hugely important skill and so important for humans because humans are herd creatures. Without finding groups of other people and relating to them, we literally could not survive. And so it is a hugely important skill to cultivate, and you should always try to be aware of how other people feel. I think that should not be discounted. I think emotions are usually the catalyst to activism, but for activism to be effective, it is generally better to have the facts on your side.
Yeah, I think emotion can really also exaggerate facts or twist it in ways during activism that can be quite bad. But also it could really propel the message you want to send and really appeal to people when you are really genuine about how you feel or experiences you've had that have caused you to turn to this side of activism. So it goes both ways.
Absolutely.
You mentioned also science and art and politics and art. To me, emotion drives art personally, which definitely could fuse into activism, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think art and activism have a similar purpose, which is to evoke some sort of response.
Evoke a reaction within you. And if it's effective and good and visceral, then it'll hopefully cause action within you or change something about how you approach life.
Absolutely. as an artist myself, I think emotions are very much what motivate me, but those emotions are often in response to facts and around that. And so I could write a speech, for example, that is sort of inspired by my feelings around what's happening on a certain topic. And that could really inspire people and get them energized. And so that's sort of how you gather people on your side and form a group for activism. But I think if your goal is to convince people convince people that oppose you, you need this is how I feel about it. These are the people who are suffering. But also, if I can show you that numerically that actually banning transgender people from sports isn't actually as helpful as it seems to be for equality, and just sort of explaining how sports equality actually works and showing the hormone levels, because people are more likely to participate in the action if they hear about the hardship someone's had to go through if they were unable to participate in the sport they wanted to participate in. But someone is more likely who doesn't agree with you is more likely to be convinced of your opinion if you have numbers on your side.
I think it all comes down to rhetoric. There are, facts that you use as your tools, but it's how you present them, how you approach them. And I think that takes a lot of creativity and open-mindedness and being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. I remember the first time I was lobbying at the state capitol in Georgia. I was maybe 14 or 15, and I was paired up with an experienced advocate. We were lobbying against a bill that was going to put undocumented immigrant workers at risk by subjecting them to more stringent screenings for certain jobs where they didn't really need these intense background checks. And what we were able to do, I wasn't really able to. I was just, my lobbying partner, talk to all these libertarian Republicans and come at it from that point of view, not changing any of the facts about the legislation. I mean, we all had it on paper, but talking about how this is just a violation of privacy, how this connects to their constituents. So recognizing that for whatever reason you oppose or support something, there are probably a dozen other reasons that folks oppose and support it. And being able to communicate effectively and touch on all of those is one of the keys to creating any sort of policy change.
What conversation do you wish were happening more?
I think we need to look at how we hold folks accountable and question our need to always just cancel folks to an extent. And I think that too often, folks rail against cancel culture when it's really just folks speaking out about somebody saying something offensive or something. But that there is, a balance that needs to be struck. That if we are gonna reverse this direction we seem to be going, in which we are getting more and more politically divided, then we're gonna have to be able to sit down with folks who we think have made mistakes, who we think have done things that we may view as, abhorrent, and be able to express our point of view, talk openly about the harm that they caused, and be willing to hear about any harm that we may have caused.
Yeah, I think conversations just that include a sense of empathy for other people, or even just like an awareness that like this person, as much as I disagree with them, even if they're saying things that seem completely abhorrent to me, just like keep in mind that this is a person, they're a human who's lived a full life, just like I have. And every human, and I'm talking like even mass murderers, like truly crazy, horrible people, are still people and deserve some level of respect just for being here and being the same as you in many ways. And I think in this very politically divided time, we really need to remember that and highlight that. But the way we highlight that should not necessarily be through trying to work out a solution that is a perfect compromise between both people. Because compromises are great on paper, but sometimes compromises will make neither side happy. And oftentimes, especially with stuff like climate change, you can't compromise on something that if it is not handled correctly could result in everyone's death. And so treat people with empathy, be kind to each other, try to unite people, but that doesn't mean sacrificing your beliefs or morals, and it doesn't mean being a people pleaser, because you have to remember that everyone is a person, but also sometimes it's okay to make people angry if you know you're doing something that will ultimately help them.
So understanding the urgency of like climate and other pressing issues, would you rather be a dictator for a day or solve it through the slow pace of democracy?
Wow.
That's a really hard fucking question, man. I mean, for me, absolutely slow pace of democracy. I mean, I think just like dictatorship, it feels wrong, Like it feels wrong to control people. Also, it just wouldn't work, because if I was a dictator for a day, as soon as I'm not a dictator, people can once again have the power and change things back again. And there would be a lot of people who agreed with me and didn't want things changed back. It would cause riots, cause upheaval, probably destabilize the country. And so if you really just think about it, it wouldn't really work out that well. So that's part of it. And then I think the other part of it is, you say slow pace of democracy. I can't speak for other countries, but in America at least, we don't actually have a democracy. It's a representational democracy, and it has a lot of flaws in its democratic process. So I actually think the pace of the American democracy could be a lot faster if the system itself were better. And so I honestly think a dictatorship for a day would truly only make things worse. But also, with what I was saying about morality, I think truly, even though what I want most of all is I want us to come up with a good plan to solve climate change and fix all that so no one has to die. But I think if the majority of the country, when given all of the information, and I mean all of the information, if they're told the actual facts and everyone is able to process that, and they still decide, no, I think we'd rather just keep doing what we're doing, I think that if that is what the society has chosen, then that is what it has chosen. And I think you can break that, and I completely understand why someone else would, but personally, I wouldn't. Now, of course, I am an activist now because right now, a lot of people don't have the facts, and I personally believe that if people had the facts about climate change, this is just an example, I think different issues, it's about different things, but for climate change, I think it's really about like facts and awareness. I think if the people of America had awareness then, and they had proper avenues to pursue it and we didn't have a country that sort of skewed democracy and sort of made a false puppet of democracy as we do, then they would choose to fight against it. That's my belief, which is why I believe in activism. But no, I would not want to be a dictator for a day.
I feel like in this hypothetical scenario, if all the documents that aren't getting signed about environmental causes and like changes were all just lined up and I could just go in and sign everything that isn't getting signed and like make everything go forward and then step out and have absolutely no responsibility, I would be down just to do it.
Dictator for a day.
Just because I feel like we've gone backwards in society in so many causes. And I feel like if there was just a person that could step in magically for one day and just fix everything and then be gone, I'd do it. But obviously that's not possible and that won't happen. But
you never know.
I would love to get rid of the filibuster, the electoral college, and gerrymandering, and then see.
So dictator for a day.
I guess I'd have to be dictator to do that, yeah.
All right.
Well, I'm alone in this, but I also completely understand because, like I was saying, if the choices are dictator for a day or true democracy, I mean, we don't have, or like slow pace of democracy, we don't really have a democracy. And so if I could be dictator today to make it a democracy, that'd be great. But, you know,
sure.
But yeah, I wouldn't want that power, but I completely understand why you guys choose that. I think it makes sense.
Whose reality will rule the future?
I believe augmented reality will rule the future and we'll all be living in our semi-digital, semi-real worlds.
What scale of future do you mean?
Just like, I hadn't thought of augmented reality. I was more thinking like there's all these movements, these political movements and groups and ideologies who all might have different realities than ours, who might have completely different belief systems that don't make sense to us. Whose reality do you think will win the future?
I don't think anyone will win.
I think that every person, as much as they claim to be aligned with a certain society's reality or a certain group's reality, there are only two realities that matter to any one person, which is their own reality and objective reality. Objective reality can't be measured. And so we can just get as close to it as possible. And so I think the goal is to just try to get as close to objective reality as possible. But really, I mean, I think if humans survive in the future, then that will continue to happen. It will be a mix of their own reality and objective reality, no matter what else is going on. Though it's just a weird mix of those two things, but mostly their own reality. But in like the future, then either, depending on your worldview, the only reality left will be objective reality because like life will be gone and the universe will be like cold and dead in a million bajillion years. Or there will be no reality left because since objective reality isn't measurable, it does not functionally exist. And so it depends on whether you believe reality can only exist if there's someone there to perceive it, which personally I don't, but it really, yeah.
Meta.
What's that movie where the robots are the earth is trash and the robots are on it?
WALL-E?
WALL-E. I believe everyone is going to be like the humans in WALL-E. I'm very pessimistic. I think we're all going to be so absorbed in our own worlds, even more so than we are today. And I think a lot of people will become that, and then there'll be a big kind of revolution or kind of screaming, running away from that and going total nature-y, which I think we're kind of getting to right now, where like new tech is coming out and we are really excited, but also a large group amount of people are kind of going the opposite direction, going, oh my God, I don't want any of this tech. I just want to go live in a farm and sustain my own food. So I don't know what's going to happen with people's realities, but I think we will all probably become more self-absorbed, but also more aware of other people's issues around the world through social media and being able to see videos and in real time empathize with other people. But I still think there'll be a large amount of self-absorption.
I mean, listen, I would not want to be a human in WALL-E, but I'd be willing to do it if it meant we could get robots that cute. That would be worth it to me.
WALL-E is pretty cute.
I hope we have a creative reality, but I feel like it'll be a capitalist one.
Yeah. We're all just pessimistic, but excited. I think there's definitely a chance for us and technology to really coexist in an incredibly beautiful way that allows humans to really just pursue their passions and not be total slaves to the machine. But I don't know enough humans will have enough self-awareness and proper quote-unquote healthy relationship with the technology, whatever that will look like in 10, 20, 30 years from now, to be able to use the technology solely as a tool to do the things, to get to do the things they really want to do. I don't know if that's going to be a possibility for everyone.
Yeah. Enough about pessimism. I want to know what brings you all hope.
It's really sad how long it's taking us to answer. I think what brings me hope is that humans, despite all the atrocities that we commit, we still in some way have the backs of at least the people around us. And I think we're all still human. And I think in order to properly empathize with people and give people the credit that they deserve, you have to believe that humans deserve some credit. And I think we do. I think as many problems as we have, I think we're a very interesting species, full of interesting people with deep lives and like great love. And I think just trying to remember that and remember that the reason we fight for these issues and fight to save people is because people are worth saving. Because I think sometimes when you're wrapped up in activism, you see all the evil stuff in the world, and part of you just wants to not do it because you're like, what's the point of saving these people if they're just going to destroy other people's lives forever and ever? But obviously it's worth it, or else why else would we care? And so I think the fact that we still care and are still able to care about people brings me hope. I guess I just hope that people can care about each other more. Also, trees bring me hope because I just like them. They're just nice. And not even in like a deep way. It's like, oh, they're here long before us and they convert to something. Not even that. I just think they're nice. I think they're, whenever I look at them, I'm like, yeah, good for you. Jealous.
I would say I feel hope because I feel like there's no other choice. There are so many people who have much less than I do, both materially, in terms of access and opportunity, in terms of support and love from other humans, who still have hope. And so I feel like I have no right to be hopeless to an extent. And if I was hopeless, it would mean that I'd given up, and I don't want to give up.
That was really deep. I think for me, my friends give me hope. The people that love me and that I love them and will always be there for me. And I think my passions in life and all the things that I want to do give me hope to keep on going and work towards something every day. I think I would be really sad if I'd given up hope on storytelling and films. I don't think I would do anything with myself. There would be no motivation. So I feel hopeful about, I guess, in a broader scope, human connection and the power of storytelling. And I'm really always pleasantly surprised by the empathy that I encounter between humans, no matter what part of the world I visit, and how much strangers people are to each other. I'm always very pleasantly surprised, and that's nice. Also, I'm very pleasantly surprised by how wonderful animals are when they're alive, even though they also taste good. Sorry, this is horrible. No, vegetarians are going to get upset. But, I am very moved by just the pure love you can feel from an animal. I think that's one of life's greatest gifts.
This is the Hatch Podcast. Royce, Andini, Addie, thanks so much for staying up late with me. Pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you so much, Tate.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This is great.
It's the silence surrounding hope that speaks volumes. After an hour of deep discussion on activism and the role of youth in shaping history, we find ourselves in a space filled with unanswered questions and uncertain futures. In a world where systems often feel constraining, today's youth navigate their education and lives within institutional walls that can sometimes stifle their voices. They learn about a planet in distress and grapple with the complexities of corporate influence that seem to overshadow their futures. Genuine connection can feel scarce in an age dominated by social technology, and the dreams of homeownership and financial security appear distant. Yet these young minds are not just passive recipients of their circumstances. They are seekers of truth, and advocates for change. Though they face pressures that seem insurmountable, this generation is also marked by resilience and creativity. They challenge norms, redefine identities, and seek solace in community. The American dream may feel out of reach, but within the struggle lies a powerful determination. When we ask them about hope, the weight of it can be palpable. Sometimes, silence becomes the most profound answer, but amidst that silence, there's a flicker of possibility, a reminder that even in uncertainty, hope can ignite the spark of change. Join us as we explore these themes and celebrate the vibrant spirit of youth in the face of adversity.
It seems now more than ever that we have found ourselves on the cusp of monumental worldwide change. Whether we consider the environment, politics, infrastructure, health, economics, or inequities across a broad swath of social constructs, the consensus is clear and urgent. All is not as it should be. The United Nations, a consortium of 193 member states from around the globe, agrees. In 2015, the UN unanimously adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. These goals call for urgent action and global partnership to secure peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future.
In alignment with the SDGs, Hatch, a curated network of artists, activists, and entrepreneurs working together to accelerate positive global change, has partnered with I Am Interchange to fuse adventure journalism with experiential design labs to develop innovative solutions to complex global challenges. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoy it, please subscribe or leave us a rating. This episode was produced by Yara Craner, Susan Karstensen, and me, Tate Chamberlain. A shout out to our media and production team, Jessica Byerly, Darko Sevilla, Jacob Desch, Sean Mackinson, Amin Yarsu, and Zane Giordano. A special thanks to Yara Craner, Jared Silverman, Pete Strom, Eitan Shapira, Rachel Hicks, Roshi Gavechi, Anya Bulis, Tania Sanders, Erica Mackey, Raymond Unsodagi, Mark Gerner, Elke Govertson, Ignacio Packer, Kyle McGrew, Eskil Björkestrand, Joshua Lesser, and the rest of the Hatch team and crew from Co-Palace for hosting me. Thank you. With so much gratitude to the Hatch supporters, Steelcase, the Kauffman Foundation, the Gwydion Fund, Envision Equality, the Hatch Volunteers, Board of Directors, Hatch Guardians, and the community who help make this work and mission possible. To learn more about Hatch, visit hatchexperience.org. Building community could not happen without food. And with that, I'd like to thank Whistle Pig Korean, Red Tractor Pizza, and Zocalo Coffee House. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.